Welcome to another edition of Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy, and this is your CFL Grey Cup Playoffs Division Semifinals preview edition of the show. We have reached the CFL postseason at long last. It is to say it's a long regular season would be an understatement. Obviously, 21 weeks. It is long. It's a grind. You go from June all the way to the end of October, but we have made it down to the final 6 remaining teams in the quest for the Grey Cup. Of course, the 2 teams that are on the bye week are the teams that won their division, have the bye to the East and West final, which they will host next week, that being the Montreal Alouettes in the East, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in the West, and hoping to join those 2 teams in the division finals next weekend are the Ottawa Red Blacks and the Toronto Argonauts, who will go head-to-head in the East semifinal on Saturday, and then the BC Lions and the Saskatchewan Roughriders, who will go head-to-head in the West semifinal on Saturday. Let's get right into it. We will begin in the East Division semifinal, Ottawa Red Blacks, Toronto Argonauts, the Argos 6.5-point home favorites, 52 being the total in this game. Obviously, these are 2 teams that we've known for a while that these were going to be the 2 teams facing off in the East final ever since Montreal clinched first place and Hamilton got eliminated officially. Pretty much was set in stone at that moment that it was going to be a Red Blacks Argos East semifinal on Saturday. 2 games, I should say, this season between the 2 teams in the regular season. Home team won and covered both games. Ottawa with the 41-27 victory on September the 7th. We remember that as the Chad Kelly nightmare game, very similar to the way he played in the East final last year against Montreal, where he just became a interception machine. The Ottawa Red Blacks forcing Chad Kelly into 4 interceptions in that game, and yet he still moved the ball as well, even in that 41-27 loss in Ottawa. He still had 463 passing yards and 3 touchdowns in that game. But obviously, he got into major issues with those interceptions. But take those interceptions away, and it's Toronto probably in that game and maybe even having a chance to win it when it's all said and done. And then they played the rematch in Toronto down the stretch of the regular season. Really, it was a game that pretty much decided who was going to get home field here for the East semifinal. And Toronto ended up, well, don't be fooled by the final score. It ended up 38-31 Argos, but Toronto fell asleep in the fourth quarter, took their foot off the gas pedal. Ottawa ended up having a 25-0 fourth quarter to turn what was at the time a 38-6 beatdown in favor of the Argos into a 38-31 final score. 25 unanswered points in the fourth quarter. So be careful with looking at that game saying Ottawa was competitive. No, when that game was there to be won, it was all Toronto in that football game. But now we get the rematch here in this one with the Red Blacks and the Argos. We'll see how this one plays out. It looks like from a weather standpoint in Toronto on Saturday, weather's not going to be too bad for this game, considering we're talking November 2nd. It's been a very warm week here in Southern Ontario. It's going to be cooler tomorrow, but still 10 degrees. I don't think winds are going to be all that much of a factor. So BMO Field, the weather should be pretty solid here for this game. Injury-wise for this East semifinal, if you look at the Ottawa Red Blacks situation, the main guys out, they're all, I don't want to say bit players, but the good news is they've gotten a lot healthier going into this playoff game, and that is definitely a good thing, including Justin Hardy, who's one of the receivers they count on, and he will play for the Red Blacks in this game. But, you even look at last week against Hamilton to finish the regular season. Now, I know that game had nothing on the line for either team, but it was good to see Drew Brown out there and playing well again. 445 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. They used Braylon Addison as a running back, running the ball. It'll be interesting to see if Bob Dice continues with that tact here in this game. The receiving core was phenomenal. And really now with a healthy Justin Hardy as well, when you factor in that they've still got Addison, who they're using as a hybrid running back receiver, Jalen Ackland, of course, Dominique Rhymes, the emergence this year of Khalil Pimpleton, who's now healthy and had 167 receiving yards in the game against Hamilton. They got a lot of weapons now, and they're finally healthy. The O-line is in better shape as well for Ottawa here these last couple of games. And we've seen evidence of it where during that 4-game losing streak, they had receivers hurt, they had O-linemen hurt. Drew Brown missed time and Masoli had to play. And that's when they struggled offensively. They've put together now 68 points in the last 2 games to wrap up the regular season. So I think this Ottawa offense is probably as cohesive and as healthy as they've been in quite some time. That at least gives them a puncher's chance. Now, I worry like hell about their defense. This is a defense that's still got major problems. Toronto went up and down the field against them a few weeks ago to wrap up home field in second place in the East so that they could host this game. And then against Hamilton, who really, after they had their home finale against Calgary, I was wondering where Hamilton's mindset would be. Ottawa defense did not look good. I mean, Bo Mitchell gets the passing record single season for the Ticats in that game, 425 through the air. The secondary's just been wretched at times for Ottawa, and you do worry about that facing Chad Kelly and this Argos receiving corps. I mean, Stephen Dunbar gets 180 receiving yards last week against this Ottawa secondary for the Ticats. And now if you're the Ottawa Red Blacks here, you've got to worry about a team that can throw a lot of great receivers at you. And what impressed me about Toronto and what makes Toronto, I think, as much as I hate to say it, because I hate the Argos, fucking hate Chad Kelly too, to be honest, but that's another story. He played better down the stretch. He tore up this Ottawa defense in that final regular season meeting. They incorporated more of a balance in the offense. The one thing Ryan Dinwiddie was criticized for earlier this season was lack of balance, became way too reliant on the pass, almost forgot the run game, almost abandoned it. But in that Ottawa game, you saw 14 carries and 55 yards from Kadeem Carey. Daniel Adeboboye got the ball for 8 carries as well. They also have Deontay McMahon. They've got 3 different backs they can go to, and they did try to run the ball more. And like I said, I like their receiving core. When you've got Tavares Daniels, David Unger, Dejon Brissett, Demonte Coxey, I should say. Makai Polk is the guy that's really started to turn some heads here with this Argos receiving core. Great speed, very dynamic playmaker, and he's been really stepping up his game down the stretch here for the Argos. Hard for me not to bet the over here. I know it's a playoff game, and I know the total's sitting at 51.5, 52. That's a very high total. And part of you wants to believe defense becomes, moves to the forefront in these games, playoffs, seasons on the line, win and you're out, or win and you move on, I should say, and lose and you go home. But these are 2 very dynamic offenses. And if you grade personnel groupings and you grade each side of the football for these teams, I think Ottawa's stronger on offense than they are on defense. And I'd probably put Toronto's defense ahead of Ottawa's, but I still think Toronto's offense is a little bit better than their defense. So I think the offense is the superior unit for both of these football teams going into this East semifinal. We look at the 2 matchups in the regular season, both of them September and beyond. One game had 68 points. The other had 69 points. What changes? What is going to be different this time around and keep this game from getting into at the very least, the mid-50s, high 50s, if not 60s? We saw 60s in both regular season meetings. The over is now 6-0 in the last 6 head-to-head encounters between the Red Blacks and the Argos. Many of those games got into the 60s as well. You see the 6-0 overrun. There's only one of these games that went over without it hitting 50 points. The other games, we saw 60, 75, 67, and then, of course, this year, the 2 games, 68, 69 total points. I'm on the over here. I just think the offenses on both sides are too good. Ottawa's defense, I don't trust to shut down Chad Kelly and the Argos. And I think the Red Blacks now, as healthy as they've been on offense in many weeks, and Drew Brown playing better in the last couple of games, I think they can do enough to contribute to this game going over the total. So I like the over. That's my favorite bet in this game is over 51.5 at DraftKings, 52 at other books. The side is trickier, and I'm approaching this a little. Look, not long term, but especially the last few years here in the CFL playoffs, underdogs plus the points against the spread have been the way to go. The underdogs have done very well here in the CFL Grey Cup playoffs, but I'm not convinced Ottawa wins this football game. So I don't love the idea of taking Ottawa. I'm going to wait till I talk about the BC-Saskatchewan game before I talk about how I'm approaching these 2 games from a side perspective. So with that in mind, I'll hold off on giving out my side position. Let me just put it this way. I have a piece of Ottawa plus 6.5, and I have a piece of Toronto in a certain form, and I will expand on that in just a moment when we talk now. The West Division semifinal, which is BC and Saskatchewan. The Rough Riders, 3.5-point home favorites, 50.5 being the total in this game. Weather in Saskatchewan, let me just bring it up. Last I checked, and this was a couple days ago, but I did not expect weather to be much of a factor in either of these games. Now, it's going to be a little bit colder in Saskatchewan than it will be in Toronto, but we're looking at very little chance of no precipitation. We are looking at potential for wind gusts in this game, though, in Saskatchewan. So keep that in mind. Wind might be a little bit of a factor here in this game between the Lions and the Riders. And as I say with totals, it doesn't bother me one bit when I see snow or when I see rain, especially if it's not heavy snow or heavy rain. But you give me wind, and especially when it comes to the passing game, that can be a detriment sometimes. So knowing that, and knowing there could be some wind Saturday night at Mosaic Stadium here in Saskatchewan for this game, I think it's important to note who can get the ground game going. Who is going to do a better job, assuming the wind plays a factor in Trevor Harris' ability to throw the football and or in Vernon Adams Jr.'s ability to throw the football. Assuming the wind plays some kind of role Saturday night, which team is going to do the better job running the football? Which team is going to do a better job stopping the run? It could come down to that in this particular football game, if indeed we're going to see the wind start to wreak havoc. From a BC standpoint, running the football has been inconsistent for them, and they have a very good running back in William Stanback. We know that, but it hasn't always been easy for this O-line to run block effectively. They've had issues with that throughout the course of the season. They're only averaging 101 rushing yards per game. That's only 5th in the CFL. Stopping the run, they've actually been decent, 97.9 rushing yards per game. Again, 5th, pretty much middle of the pack when it comes to stopping the run. You look at the Saskatchewan Roughriders this season as far as running the football. They currently rank 6th in the CFL, 89.6 rushing yards per game. So just actually a little bit behind the BC Lions, but not by much. You know, BC's 5th in the CFL, 101 rushing yards per game. Saskatchewan at almost 90. Yes, it's a little bit more per game for BC, but not by a lot. The big difference is BC's run defense is so-so. Saskatchewan's run defense all year has been great. The best run defense, in fact, in the CFL. 80.3 rushing yards per game allowed, number 1 in the CFL. It's Saskatchewan's secondary that can't cover down the field consistent. Well, I like Rolly Milligan. He's by far the best player they have in that pass defense, the Rough Riders. But the rest of that secondary, man, they've been carved up at times. So again, with this BC team, and you look at the game they played down the stretch to get right against Montreal when Rick Campbell finally announced that I'm going with Vernon Adams Jr., and I'm going to go with him for the rest of the season. He's our guy. He's going to be our number 1 quarterback in the playoffs. We're going to pull the plug on Nathan Rourke for the rest of the season. You look at that offensive output against Montreal, they put up over 500 yards, but 393 of it was through the air. You know, only 143 was on the ground for the BC Lions in that game. They were very pass heavy. So the concern becomes for BC, if they have trouble and the winds whip up there in Regina and play havoc on the passing game, which they could. Like we're talking potential for 35, 40 kilometer an hour wind gusts from what I'm seeing here with the forecast. Is BC going to be able to run the football effectively? Because and that's not the only game. You go back to some of the games Rourke started, the games early in the year when Vernon Adams was lighting. Remember, Vernon Adams looked like an early season MOP candidate back in June and July. It feels like eons ago because of how long the season is. But I remember back then just how good the passing game was, and it was pretty much all through the air, and the run game was really not clicking for BC. A lot of those great numbers for the BC Lions offense early in the season, June and July, was the passing game doing the damage, not so much running the football. That's another thing to factor when they were putting up all those big points, including a win against Saskatchewan 35-20. All of it was through the air. They didn't have a great run game. They had no run game at times, BC. So if both teams are forced to run the football more, there's probably an advantage to Saskatchewan here in this football game coming up on Saturday. So we'll see how that one plays out. But, definitely I think it's a spot for it could be a spot that it gives Saskatchewan an advantage if that wind is going to become an issue here in this game. As far as injuries are concerned, there's no Frankie Hickson for the Saskatchewan Roughriders. So that's an absence that they'll miss. Really, the main absences are him and Sean Bain at receiver. And we know Sean Bain's season ended weeks ago. But Sam Emelis is good to go. Peter Godber, key offensive lineman, very key offensive lineman for Saskatchewan. He's available. Anthony Lanier is good to go. Rolly Milligan. AJ Ouellette is going to, regain his status as the number one running back here for this game. And look, AJ Ouellette, he's had injuries and he's not been as effective as I think a lot of people expected, for Saskatchewan when they signed him in the offseason. This is his chance for redemption. The one thing we saw from Ouellette is he tells us he's a playoff type running back, that in the playoffs he turns it up to another gear. We'll see if we find that next gear for him coming up in this game for the Rough Riders. Keep in mind, Rock Armstead is there, and he in flashes, showed some ability as well to run the football well down the stretch. So I think you're probably going to see both of them, Ouellette and Armstead, get their share of carries here for Saskatchewan. I think it's going to be kind of a split backfield here for Saskatchewan in this game, so that'll be interesting to monitor. I think when you look at this game, when you look at these two teams, certainly they're good offensively. Trevor Harris needs pass protection. Very, very important for BC to get the pass rush going. And I find for this BC Lions team that their pass rush has been very inconsistent. Obviously, Covington's been great with 6 sacks. Sione Tuhema, 7 sacks. Matthew Betts, though, he's been back for 6 games. He's only got 2 sacks. This is a guy that dominated in the CFL, and it was his dominance last year in the CFL that got him the look that he got in training camp with the Detroit Lions. And yet we just haven't seen that same dominant level from him as far as getting pressure. And the BC Lions pass rush has been very inconsistent, very spotty throughout the course of the season. And it's always the key when you're facing Trevor Harris. If he has a set pocket, clean pocket to throw from, he can pick you apart because his accuracy when he can set his feet, stand in the pocket, is as good as it gets. He is a very accurate passer as long as he has time to throw the football. You have to get him off his spot. You have to force him out of the pocket. That's when the inaccuracies, and that's usually when Trevor makes his mistakes. And I've seen this, and Trevor's a friend of mine. You know that. He's been on this show before, and he'll be on again probably before the Super Bowl next year. He knows this, and I know this, and we're not saying anything that's not true. You get him off his spot in the pocket, and that's when the mistakes sometimes happen, when he floats the ball too far or overthrows or underthrows a receiver, and that's when the interceptions can happen. So that's critical for BC. Pass rush has to influence Trevor Harris and get after him in this game, if they're going to have a big chance. Meanwhile, you look at Saskatchewan's defense. Vernon Adams, if they can't run the football consistently against Saskatchewan with stand back, and it's not going to be easy. This is the best run defense. They have to create a run game. Another way, I think, it's get the ball out quickly of Vernon Adams' hands, and he does have a great receiving core, as we know. There's no doubt. And look, last year I thought they were deeper, but I think with what you're seeing from obviously Justin McGinnis and Alexander Hollins and Aiden Eberhardt has stepped up, Keon Hatcher, there's definitely still plenty of weapons here in the passing game for Vernon Adams and the BC Lions. But get the ball out quick. If you can't run the football, maybe let Vernon Adams take off with it. And this is a playoff game now, so this might be a spot where Vernon Adams is more likely to run with the football. In a game that didn't mean much of anything against Montreal, he did have 39 rushing yards and 5 carries in the final regular season game for the BC Lions. So now that it's a playoff game, and the fact that the run game just straight handing the ball off in the backfield to stand back. It's not going to be easy against this great run defense of Saskatchewan. If you're thinking player props in this game, there's certainly reasons to like Vernon Adams over rushing yards, because I think he is going to have to make some of that that run game work based on quarterback keeps, quarterback RPO, that kind of stuff. Incorporate some of that into this matchup here if you're Jordan Maximic, the offensive coordinator for the BC Lions. So that might be a prop worth looking at here, is maybe a little bit of Vernon Adams rushing yards. I don't know who's going to post it. I don't know if it will be posted, because sometimes not every quarterback you can bet their rushing yards, but it's definitely something to look at in this game. Again, I kind of like the over initially in this game as well. You look at head-to-head. We saw in BC 35-20 earlier this year. The game in October 12th, 39-8 for Saskatchewan, but that turned into a blowout. Nathan Rourke didn't play well, and then most of the fourth quarter in that game was Chase Bryce at quarterback for BC. If not for that, it probably still would have went over the total. So this is another type of matchup here with, just like with Toronto, Ottawa. There's been a lot of high-scoring games, but the wind could be a factor. And even though, like I said, we've seen 63, 59, and 55 points 3 of the last 4 meetings, the wind is a potential impediment here for this game going over the total. So that's kind of why I'm lukewarm a little bit in my approach there with that total. As far as the side goes, BC showed real life, real energy, and a legit spark in that finale against Montreal with Vernon Adams back under center. It looked like that got everybody focused, everybody locked in, and they dominated that game. But don't make too much out of it. Montreal's not played great down the stretch. They had first place locked up a long time ago. That being said, BC looked like they were dialed in. But the fact remains, Saskatchewan, really dominated them October 12th. Saskatchewan has really played their best football down the stretch throughout the Calgary game, because they knew just before that game started, Winnipeg had clinched the West with their win against Montreal. They rested all their starters for the most part. So you throw that out. But before that, BC 4-0 straight up, 4-0 against the spread. They played their best football mid-September and onward. Their home record, 5-4 this year. BC only 3-6 this year straight up away from BC Place Stadium, 3-6 on the road. I think Saskatchewan wins. Now, I don't love 3.5. I could see this being a field goal game, and I think there's something to it that BC got a shot in the arm from Vernon Adams being, basically anointed again the starting quarterback at the end of the season. So I think it's a competitive game. So now back to what I'm doing as far as a side goes. I grabbed some Ottawa plus 6.5 and some BC. I actually see BC plus 4, minus 115 right now at bookmaker/Chris. So if you can get a 4 with BC, I grabbed pieces of both underdogs for a quarter unit each. But for a full unit, I'm on a 2-team moneyline parlay with the 2 home favorites, Toronto and Saskatchewan, which is plus 112 at FanDuel. So my approach is, I think it's Toronto and Saskatchewan moving on to the East and West final this weekend. But I would not be stunned to see the games be competitive and it be a battle for both Toronto and Saskatchewan to win these games. And I could see them both coming down to a last-second field goal. So it's kind of an attempt at a middle for me with both games. I'm on the Argos and Riders moneyline parlay. That's the primary bet. But I also have a small piece of Ottawa plus 6.5, small piece of BC plus 4, with the intention of trying to middle these, that maybe we can get Toronto winning by 1-6, BC or Saskatchewan winning in that range of 1-3. And you know what the CFL can be like, and especially in, we saw Edmonton win a game on a walk-off rouge, a walk-off single point. We've seen a lot of games come down to the wire. We've seen a handful of games this year where the winning margin of victory has been 1 point, 2 points, 3 points. It wouldn't shock me if we see that here. So it's a kind of a different approach that I'm taking here. Ottawa quarter unit at plus 6.5, BC quarter unit at plus 4. And then we're going to go a full unit with the moneyline parlay on the Argos and the Riders to win, and that is plus 112. And we'll see what happens. If we cash the parlay, that's the main thing. And even if we just get one of the two teams, Ottawa and BC, covering the point spread as a dog, it's going to be a nice little middle for at least one of the two games. I'm hoping for the middle on both games. This is a approach I don't normally take. It's not one I would make every week, but I think given the way I handicap these two games and my thought process and the game flow, I could see a Saskatchewan and Toronto close victory, quite honestly, in these two games. So that is the approach for me when it comes to the East and West Division semifinals. Definitely looking forward to these two games. By the way, I didn't mention much. Toronto's pretty healthy. There weren't really many major injuries of note as far as the Argos are concerned. Everyone's pretty much ready to go. Although, actually, there is one. I mentioned DeMonte Coxey. He is the one receiver that doesn't look like he's going to be available for Toronto. So that does hurt, but they've got a bunch that they can count on there at that position. And I mentioned for BC, as far as injuries go, they will be without Keontae Evans at corner. That's a veteran corner. You're going to miss him. Gary Peters, the other corner, is good to go, though. So they're not in bad shape. Bola Combo is out at linebacker. They will miss him a little bit. But like I said, and Javon Katoy, by the way, is available. And keep in mind, he's had some missed time this year for BC as well. But those are the injury reports updated. Looking forward to the division semifinals. Shout out to everyone tuning in. Appreciate it very much. Hit the like button on the way out if you haven't done so already. Let's wrap things up and give you a best bet for CFL division semifinals. Best bet for me is I'm going to go with that first game, East semifinal, Ottawa-Toronto. Let's go over 50. Actually, you know what? DraftKings just dropped to 51, even better. And I'm not shocked we're seeing some people liking the under. It is a playoff game. There is more attention to detail and focus defensively. I get all that, but boy, oh boy, 6 straight overs with the Red Blacks and the Argos. Both games in the regular season got well into the 60s, and the total here, 51, 51 and a half. I think we can find a way to get that game up and over the total. 30-24 cashes a ticket with that over. I think it's doable in that game. So we'll go with Ottawa, Toronto, East Division semifinal, over 51 for my best bet for the division semifinals in the Canadian Football League. That's a wrap for Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy. I will be back next week, and we will look at the division finals, and we'll find out who Winnipeg and Montreal will face and host next week in the CFL division finals. I'm Ian Cameron. Enjoy the CFL division semifinals on Saturday. Enjoy the games and good luck, and I will be back with you next week to preview the CFL division finals right here on Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy.